Hi guys, Sean with Scale RC Engines here. Today we're going to be going over the cockpit kit and gun set installation on the Hangar 9 D7. This is one of our upgrade kits for the ARF. We're going to go ahead and go through how to assemble all this. It is recommended that you do the guns and the guns and the cockpit together at the same time, as this is going to go more smoothly than if you try to do them one at a time. If you only purchased one, go ahead and fast forward through the gun set installation, which we're going to cover first. The first step is going to be to glue those two body halves together. You can place them face down on the table, as you see me doing here, to get the best alignment. You're going to want to make sure you don't have a gap showing on the left or right side, as this is going to interfere with the barrel shroud later when we go to attach that. For this entire video, I'm going to be using Bob Smith Medium CA. We don't sell that or anything, it's just what I found to be one of the better glues to use for assembling our products. It doesn't show a white haze when you use the kicker, and you'll see throughout the video I used quite a bit of kicker to save on the time, so we were able to record this. Once you have those two body halves glued together, as you see, we're going to attach that front shroud. There is an up and a down, so be careful that you don't glue it on upside down. This front shroud does have the front mount, so again, check that you have that front tab facing down, and go ahead and be a little generous with this fit to make sure you fill in the void between the locating tab and the hole at the back of the gun shroud. As you'll see in this clip in a moment, I didn't use enough glue the first time, so I had to go back and add a little bit more to make sure that bond was nice and strong. Gonna apply a little bit of kicker, make sure the bond is nice and strong, holding firmly but not too tight, the two together, just to make sure we have a nice seam and the front shroud doesn't wobble on the front of the body. If it does wobble, go ahead and add a little more CA. We want to have a nice firm fit, as that is going to be the front mount for this gun set. Next, we're going to go ahead and take the eject chute and dry fit it to the body of the gun, making sure there's no burrs or anything. We're then going to apply a little bit of CA on that notch feature and glue it into the gun set. Guys, be mindful, do not glue the shroud or the ejection chute on the second gun. We only want to glue this on the first gun. The second one will be glued after the guns are fixed to the airplane. They can be removed with it on, but it's a lot easier to do the final tightening with one of them off. We are going to have the front one on to use as a guide when we go to notch the cockpit later. The next step you see me doing here, we're going to be attaching that little lever. You'll see a little emboss on the side of the gun where that goes. Again, we're just going to use a drop of CA. After that, we are also, at the same time, we're also going to be attaching the back gun sight. Make sure the front flat portion is facing forward. You'll see in a moment here which is the correct direction. All right. So you can see here, this is going to be the correct placement of that back gun sight. We're going to align the center of it with the magazine insert from the ammo box. Again, with that flat portion facing forward on the gun. As you'll see here, I have a pipette that I'm using to apply small amounts of CA. It's a method I found works best for these smaller parts to avoid over gluing. I've also used these small extensions that fit on the end of the CA bottle to neck down the CA. You can find them available online or at your local hobby shop. Got that nice and centered. There's no interlocking feature on this part, so make sure you take a little extra time to get it centered for a more polished look at the end. I'm going to use that pipette to add a little bit of CA to that feature I showed you earlier and get that lever on the side there. All right, now we're going to put the front barrel on. This doesn't have a notch on it, but it does seat into the barrel. There is a little ridge that you'll be gluing to get the two together. Again, this is another part you want to take some extra time. Make sure that barrel is in the center of the bottom. Once the glue sets, you will not be able to remove the front any of the components. The bond with the medium CA is stronger than the plastic itself. Not that the plastic is weak, but there it is going to wick into each surface and fuse the two joining surfaces together. I'm just taking some time, making sure those are aligned. Adding a little bit of kicker when I'm satisfied with it. And then we're going to move on to that front sight. The sight is going to go on as shown with the little L shape facing backwards of the gun and the sight being flush with the front edge of that shroud. Again, this component doesn't have a locating feature, so be sure to align it with the back sight when you glue it on. As you can see there, I gave it a little test wiggle and it did pop back off, so I'm going to go ahead and apply a little more CA there to fill the void. Checking that alignment again from the rear sight to the front sight to make sure everything looks aligned. Feel free to use the shroud itself to help with this. There are some nice features. You can use the slots and the solid lines going down it to help with the alignment. Again, as I mentioned, do not glue the second exit chute onto the second gun when you go to put it together, and also do not glue the magazine or ammo box onto the gun sets. We're going to do that at the end once we have everything hard mounted. Now I'm going to go ahead and assemble that second gun. Feel free to fast forward through the video if you've already done this step. Front barrel, we're going to do the same method. Glue the notch into the slot on the shroud. You're going to want to use a little bit more CA on this. There is a small void that the CA takes up just to get a nice secure fit between the body and the front shroud. Both portions do have their own mount that will be attaching this to the pod, the cockpit pod itself. So we want to make sure those two parts are fused nice and strong. Moving on to that rear gun sight like before. And using that little pipette just to avoid any over gluing and dripping, as it is quite it's a small little piece that we're gluing on there. Moving on to that front barrel again. This time I'm going to go ahead and apply the glue to the shroud itself instead of the barrel. All right, and then we've got that front gun sight glued on again. And we're going to do that little side lever that we did on the first one. All right, just doing a little bit of cleanup work before we move on to the next step. Now we're going to start looking at the cockpit pod itself. The reason we glue one of the exit chutes onto the guns is to help us align that front notch you'll see there. There are some small modifications you'll need to do to the cockpit pod. These were all done with an X-Acto knife, but feel free to use a Dremel or any tool of your preference. Most of you, I assume, will be using a already built ARF, so you will need to do some removal of some existing components. The first is going to be that front magazine. There was that silver magazine made of wood that initially came with the ARF that was torn out, and a small cut was made down the side there. I should say the cut is already existing for that magazine. The chute, the opening was extended forward to fit the new ones. We are going to be using the stock metal U-bracket mounts that came with the ARF, so don't dispose of those. And we're going to need to do another small cut, as I mentioned earlier, along the front bulkhead and notch it for that exit chute on the left gun. When you remove the existing wooden magazine, if you want to do any cleanup work, that wouldn't be a bad idea. We did end up repainting the bottom there, but if I could do it again, I might add some spackle in there or wood filler to clean that up. The portion you'll see me pointing out now, there is a fake gauge that sticks up above this portion of the dash. You do want to go ahead and remove that, as it will not be covered up by the new dash, and it's going to have a full scale gauge in its place. Again, this area I did end up breaking when I removed the old magazine, or ammo box, I should say. Feel free to clean that up before you proceed if you want to have a nice finished look. I just went ahead and painted mine. The next step is going to be assembling this dashboard. You're going to want to CA all these parts on ahead of time and apply all the stickers. There was a nice graphic in the photos section of the Cockpit Kit product page to reference where all these components go. This is a little bit of a time-consuming step to get all those silver labels on there, but we do have a nice graphic showing where they all go. Depending on how much time you've set aside for this project, you might want to assemble the dash and come back later for the rest of it, as that is a bit of a tedious process, which we did off camera just to shorten the length of this video. What we're doing now is we're taking those stock screws that came with the ARF and we're inserting them through the holes on the dashboard. We're going to be using these to align the dash to the existing one. So we're not going to tighten these down, but we are going to get these threads started just so we can use the screws as a guide when we go to CA on the new dash over the old one. As you can see there, I got the dash pulled back a little bit. And we're going to be dripping some glue down into that void along the old dash, and then we'll be pressing the new one against it to bond the two together. All right, now I'm just going to go ahead and apply that CA down in there. Do your best not to drip down below, but we will be covering the stock floor, so if you drip a little bit, it's not the end of the world if you have to sand it down. This is going to be a glue and mechanical assembly, so later on there will be a mechanical component that is also holding the dash on, so the CA is not the only thing fixing this into the airplane. Once I've got that CA and kicker in there, I'm just going to hold and press. Be mindful of the levers and other components that you glued onto the dash. We don't want to break any of those off at this point. We're going to do our best for the rest of the assembly to remember that there are those thin levers at the bottom and they can break if they are impacted. So just be mindful of that for the rest of the assembly, not to bump into them too hard or break them off. If you do, you can use a little bit of CA to reattach them. You'll see here that kicker is already set up and that dash is attached. So I went ahead and took those screws back out and I pulled out my front frame piece, which I'm showing you here. The front frame is going to be screwed on with the stock U-brackets that came with the ARF. So make sure you have those on hand. They are going to be assembled with the frame, the screw passing through the frame, through the U-bolt, and then through the dash where you just took the screws out of. You see here I'm fitting that U-bracket to the new gun just to make sure there's no variation in the U-bracket and to make sure I have a nice clear but snug fit into the gun itself. Again, just checking that fit. I've actually got it in the front one this time. Looks like I made a little bit of a mistake. It will be mounting to the back hole, not in the one I have it now. Have it on now. Alright guys, so you're going to want to grab both those U-brackets. We're going to pass the screws through them ahead of time. This is a little bit tricky, so be patient with it. It's a little bit of a juggling act to get this right the first time, but you're going to want to have both those U-brackets and the screws through that front frame, and then once we get all that set up, as you can see there, I dropped one, we're going to get those screws started with the U's facing up just to get everything aligned, and then we're going to end up tightening those down, and this is going to be the base for the rest of the frame mounting. So you can see here I'm keeping those U brackets in the upward position, and I'm getting those screws started by hand. You'll see here I'm going to go ahead and snug those up. It is recommended to add some blue Loctite to these screws. They will rattle out once the airplane is flying if you do not Loctite them to the blind nuts. It is also recommended to, after you have these snugged down, to check the fit against the guns. There is some variation in these cockpit pods, so you may have to add a couple small washers depending on where your U brackets fit, but they should be very close, if not perfect. So that's what you'll see me doing there. I'm checking the alignment from the back U bracket to the front U bracket, and this is also when you're going to use that left gun to get that notch cut in correctly, like you see here. So remember, it's not going to fit if you haven't cut that notch in, so make sure you use the left-hand assembled gun to do that at this point if you haven't already. Now we're going to start working with these side panels. Again, when you're inserting these, be very mindful of the front dash. These do go in snugly, so we want to make sure we're not forcing anything and breaking anything off. You'll see here I have the floor in my hand. There is a raised section in the front that is going to face the front of the airplane and slide in through the front opening like you see here. It will butt up to the back of the cockpit opening and the front lip there, and that front thickness is just to add a little bit of strength because it is going to hang out like you see it once it's the final assembly. And that's just for a more scale look as you're looking down into the cockpit. The floor continues out past the opening. It doesn't have that end to it if you're looking down inside the plane. Go ahead and be generous with the CA on this one. It is a thin piece of plastic, and we want to make sure we have all those edges planted firmly against the floor. So I've gone ahead and inserted that. In a moment here, I'm going to place it on the table and apply pressure once I know everything is lined up properly. Just hold till dry. Again, I'm just checking to make sure that floor seated all the way and is glued in. We don't want that popping out later as it is going to be the main surface that we glue some of our components onto. Alright guys, so now we have the red side panels here. What we're going to do is insert these panels from the front, this is the portion you're going to want to be very mindful of that front dash because we're going to be inserting them near some switches that are on the bottom there. They can be broken if they're forced too much, so we're just, again, be careful as you slide those through the front. We're going to go ahead and dry fit everything now. You'll see right here I have the left panel. The left and the right are interchangeable, so don't worry about checking that. They are the same. So we got the left panel inserted in there. Now we're going to take the back. We can insert that through the top. This is going to be a very tight fit. Not tight, but snug. Just make sure you don't have any of it puckering out. And when you get that seated all the way back in there, there is some variation in these cockpit pods, so we want to just make sure that the ones we went off of where we took our measurements are a little different from the one you have at home. And if you need to do any trimming now, these checks are where you're going to want to take it out, make sure it fits, make sure you have a nice seamless look like on the one on mine, and do any trimming if necessary, but more than likely yours are going to fit the same way you see in the video. So again, just dry fitting that other side on now. Taking a look in there, making sure nothing is bowing or popping out. And really just look at that. The red inserts in the floor just add a whole new level of depth to this cockpit kit. We spent some time figuring this out, and it really just dolls up the whole inside box. All right, now that I've got those dry fitted, I'm going to go ahead and take the side panels back out and start gluing them together. Now you'll see here, I got the first one out. Going to start applying that medium CA. Now before that, we're going to pull out the second one actually. You'll see here in a moment that the back panel is a snug fit, so it does take me a moment to get it back out. I end up using a curved pick, a little dental pick, to help pull that back out. I was able to get up in the edge, the upper edge underneath the overhang, and pull that forward. You'll see me doing that now. But once I got that third one out, we're going to go ahead and start gluing them in. Opted to start with the back one for the glue. It doesn't matter which way you put them in, which order. I started with the back one and then proceed to the sides. It won't matter if you do it in this order or start with the sides and move on to the back one. Applying a little pressure now just to make sure it's seated in there. I've got a good glue bond all the way around the edge. Reinserting those sides from the front. Adding a generous amount of glue just to make sure these side panels stay nice and tight against the sidewall. You'll notice I'm not adding any glue to the top portion, only on the side. That top portion can float on the edge. It's not going to have any negative results down the line, so feel free to not glue that upper edge and just do the sides themselves. Doing a little bit of cleanup. Looks like I added a little bit too much glue on that one. And finally doing the other side panel now. Getting in there. Be mindful again of those lower gauges. They do hang close to the bottom, if not below the dashboard, and you can knock them off if you aren't paying attention. If you do knock one off, you can use a little bit of CA to reattach it. They are pretty strong and do take a good amount of force to actually break, but just be mindful of them all the same. Getting that side panel glued in now. And as you can see, nice seamless fit around all the edges. No glue drips. And I've got everything in there nice and secure now. At this point, we're going to start moving on to the rest of the framework, which I'll pull out in a moment here. And we're going to start doing some of the pre-assembly on the framework at this point. You're going to want to do this ahead of time like I'm about to do. Do not try, well, you can try, but it's not recommended to glue these inside while they're inside the cockpit. I'm going to start off with the left side rail here. The triangle is going to be on the bottom, and you're going to be gluing the throttle lever onto this portion. So you'll see here there's a little notch. I'll have a close up in a minute in the camera to see it a little better. But on the back of that L bracket on the throttle lever, there is a notch in the center, and that's going to line up with the notch on the frame for the left-hand side. They aren't a snap fit. They are just meant to guide you. You can see that notch there. I just showed it there. So yeah, you can see. Now we're going to go ahead and line those two up, making sure there's no burrs or anything from production. Um, they should slide into each other as a locating feature. And you're going to go ahead in a moment and apply a little bit of CA to the inside of that L, as well as in the notch hole itself. Just taking mind to make sure that throttle lever is vertical to the frame rail. Again, I got my CA out, a little bit of kicker. I believe I mentioned it earlier, but I'm using the medium CA from Bob Smith and the Bob Smith kicker. This particular product has not shown any hazing or white on any of our products, so feel free to use that like I am and be generous with the kicker and the CA if you feel like it, because you won't have any repercussions from the chemical reaction. All right, so now that I've got that throttle lever on that left frame rail, I'm going to move on to the right side. And as you can see, I put on the end of this cap. We're going to go ahead and attach the cap and the compass to the right hand side. The compass, you will want to put your sticker in ahead of time, just to make your life easier, instead of trying to insert the sticker when it's down in the cockpit. So again, I'm going to add a little bit of CA. One small difference you'll notice in the video is that my handle that I'm gluing on here does have brown on it. Yours will come in full gray. I went ahead and just added a little bit of brown paint to mine after the fact, just to get a little more depth in my cockpit kit. It's a small detail, it takes about a minute to do. Something you might want to consider before gluing yours in. Right here, we're gluing in the compass. There's a post on the bottom of it, and that just goes right into the hole. Just be mindful to make sure the post doesn't stick out below the bottom of the little tab, as this is going to be against the floor of the cockpit kit later, and it might cause some interference if you push the compass too far into the hole in the tab. As you can see there, you get the final product. Next, we're going to go insert that right frame rail in. And again, there's another notch feature up in the front against the front frame. It's the same as what was on the throttle lever. You have a notch in one side and the hole on the other. These are again for alignment. They do not snap fit or anything like that, but they're there to aid you when you're gluing the sides of the frame to the front. Now we're going to go ahead and insert that left one. We haven't applied any glue yet. We're just dry fitting everything. Again, when you're inserting this portion, be careful of that front dash. We don't want to see any snapped off levers. This is the back portion. Again, with two more notches assisting for alignment. You'll see here in a moment, I'm going to take my pick, and I'm going to use it to help me apply pressure. You'll see that it's the side tubing is falling down on me. Um, so I found that the pick is a very useful tool when doing this dry fitting and when adding the glue, just to help keep that frame nice and perpendicular to the front and back ones and keep it vertical on the sides. This the frame tubing is not going to touch the red sidewalls we put in earlier, so we are relying on this joint to hold it in place. So just be sure to to get a good firm attachment point between the two. As you saw there, I was using the pick to help me with that before I went ahead and checked the fit on the back frame. Again, pulling on the other side just to make sure that notch fit is nice and secure before applying any glue, and just dry fitting the entire tubing assembly before I go ahead and glue it. This is a little bit of a tedious process, guys, so just take your time. Get a little bit of a better angle back here for you. Making sure we are facing the right way up so that the notches fit. And you can see in this angle a little bit better where that back piece is going to sit. You're not going to be able to really get that back piece dry fitted fully until you glue the front pieces together. But it's good to check that the two notches do fit in the holes properly and there's no hang-ups in there before you start applying the glue, so you can take the sides out if you need to. Now you'll see I've got my pipette out. I'm starting to glue in my side rails. I'm just separating them slightly, getting some glue down in that hole where the notch is, and making sure I'm nice and vertical before I kick it with the kicker. Now we're just adding a little bit more glue to the pipette now. And we're going to do the same process on the other side. Again, separating that frame rail a little bit to get some glue down in the hole. Lining it all up and using some kicker before applying some pressure to get that notch really into the tab, into the hole, and completing that corner joint. Now you can see here, I got them all seated. The frames are fixed in there. They will firm up a little bit more once we have that back piece, but you can see just that little joint is going to be more than enough to get that glue in there, or to keep those sturdy. And once we add this back piece of framing, we're going to be complete the box and really stiffen up this entire tubing assembly. Again, same process back here. We're going to check that fit. Get those notches lined up and that back piece in there. Now that the top ones are glued in, it's a little easier to pin it back there. Going in with my pick and just pulling those notches together. And you can see it there. It's suspended just on the pressure alone before we add any glue. Now again, separating it, getting some glue down in that hole. This is really where the pipette helps out a lot, getting in that back corner because it is covered by the overhang at the back of the opening. And again, just adding a little more glue on the other side, completing the tubing assembly. Using my pick to pull that joint tight before the glue sets. And as you can see, now we have the completed tube assembly. Moving on to the next step now, I've gone ahead and pulled out the optional pilot that we offered with this kit. We're going to go through a couple of things with that quickly. As you'll see, he has a metal frame inside of his body. He will fit completely inside the cockpit kit. You will need to remove the boots. Those will not fit. And we're also going to do a little bit with this hat here. So if you put him in with just the hat on and the goggles, they will fly off in flight. So what we do to prevent that is we just put a dot of CA on his head, like you'll see me doing now. And we're just going to go ahead and glue that leather cap right onto him. Just a little bit of kicker inside the cap. Let's get that nice and seated there. Make sure it's how you like it. Smooth out the top so we don't have any weird wrinkles or bulges on the top of the leather cap. Then we're going to go ahead and attach his chin strap and his goggles. Again, make sure the goggles have an elastic on them. I prefer to put them in the up position, but you can put them over his eyes. With them in the up position, I go ahead and add a little bit of CA to them as well, just in the corners to make sure that they don't fall off. So you see I got them on there and over the eyes. Let me get them all lined up how I like them. Smooth out the cap. And then now that I've got them in the position, we're going to just take our pipette again, and we're going to add a couple dots just in the corner. This is just going to prevent them from flying off, because this is obviously an open cockpit airplane, and that elastic will blow, the goggles will blow, and that elastic will spring them off of his head. All right, so now I've got them in the on his head position the way I prefer. Again, do it. It's your pilot. You can put them over his head, however you like. I've got that CA kicked, and now I'm going to move on to inserting him. So, the other thing, we're going to flatten his feet. Once we've removed the boots, you're going to need this to get this through the cockpit kit. And we're just going to preliminary put his arms in a position. Now, for this particular ARF, we're going to bend him further up than you would think. So where you would normally think that the waist would be, we're going to actually bend him up more closer to the bottom of his rib cage, where his rib cage would be. And he's going to look a little strange from our perspective with him out of the plane, but this is going to seat him a little lower and give you a better scale look that once it's actually installed into the plane itself. So again, try to copy the bend I did the best you can. And we're going to just do a quick dry fit. Make sure he looks correct at the correct height from a side profile inside the cockpit. And again, watch those dials as you're inserting him past them. Take your time to get him down in there. His feet will pass all the way through to the front, where you'll see shortly. You see I pulled his arms up a little bit just to get him out of my way and get him seated in there nicely. And now, as you can see from the side profile, he looks correct. Even though we have him bent really hard, or even though the bend is very high up on his body, when he's in the plane there, you can't see that bend that we just did. He looks like a normal pilot sitting down in the cockpit. And his head height is going to be aligned with those gun sights. That's going to be your main tell, is that his eyes should be aligned with the sights on the gun. So we've done our preliminary checks. We know the pilot is bent to the correct position. And we're going to go ahead and remove him momentarily and start prepping the cockpit for putting him in. So again, you can see I actually had him a little high there. I've actually bent him even further up on the chest, more towards the middle of his rib cage in preparation, so he sits a little bit lower for my preference. We're going to put him to the side for now. Now what we're going to do is take that seat and we're going to get it centered up and pushed back into the back of the cockpit. We're going to get it as close to that back as possible. It will fit under the frame rail, though it is a very close fit. So the frame rail will most likely be touching the top of your seat. That is normal. But we're going to want to get that seat as far back as we can. Applying a little bit of glue to the bottom edge there. Very simple. Doing our best to center up that seat back the best we can from left to right and pushing it all the way to the back of the floor. And guys, if you don't get this perfect and it's sitting in front of your frame, it's not going to affect anything. So don't panic. If it doesn't fit underneath your frame rail, just go ahead and glue it in right in front of it. You'll have the same end result. So as you can see mine, I got it underneath that back frame rail, pushed all the way against the back, and centered up the best I can by eye. All right, we cut a little bit here. Had to switch cameras. So now, again, what we're going to do, we're going to go ahead and do that bend again, and we're going to get our pilot down into the cockpit kit. Now, one thing I personally like to do is I use a zip tie around his coat. This is going to skinny him up a little bit and show just a little bit more of the cockpit kit so that he's not covering a lot of those features that we put in earlier. So I'm just going ahead and putting that zip tie around his waist like I was just talking about. And we're just going to get it up around his coat. And the goal is just to make his coat a little less, I guess, pushed out would be the right word. We're just trying to keep it closer to his body further down. That way we see features like our compass and our throttle lever if you're looking down into the cockpit. Again, we're just cinching him up. Gonna cut those zip ties clean. And we're gonna go ahead and insert him in. All right, so the next step, what we're gonna do, we're gonna put his arms up once we've got him in how we like him, and I'm gonna take my drill, and I'm gonna drill 2 holes through the floor of the cockpit kit and the floor of the pod. And the reason I'm doing this is to make the pilot be able to come out of the cockpit. So if, God forbid, I ever need to replace the plane, take the pilot out for any reason, maybe I found one I like better, there are various reasons, want to put him in a different airplane. This is going to allow us to do that without ripping glue, breaking things. But what we're doing, I'm just drilling a hole around each side of him, and I'm going to attach him to the plane itself using a zip tie. So once I get those 2 holes drilled down through everything, we're going to go ahead and put that zip tie on him like a seatbelt. And this is going to hold him in just fine. He's not going to come flying out. That seatbelt method I've used on many planes. It's worked for all of them. This plane has been flown since the video several times, and there's no issues whatsoever inserting him like this. So now that I've got those holes in there, I'm just going to go ahead and show them one more time. You can see them through the bottom of the airplane. I'm going to go ahead and swap to the bigger drill size now that I've got my pilot holes drilled. And I'm just going to open those up so they're big enough for the zip tie to pass through cleanly. And just popping through the wood layer, being careful as I pop through the plastic layer. The drill is going to bite, as you saw. So again, just popping through the layers. So you can see the nice big holes between the frame rail and the seat. That's why I went ahead and did the pilot holes down, just to make sure that we don't punch through the seat itself or the tubing on the side. So now we've got our pilot reinserted. Gonna get his arms down in there. And pass our zip tie up through the cockpit. All right, now before I cinch him down, we're going to go ahead and attach this gauge. As you saw, I preliminary put it into the frame off camera, though it wasn't glued in yet. So it's another notch and hole, a square notch and square hole. Just make sure that you apply your sticker ahead of time and glue it in right side up. If you're not sure which way that is, you can go back and reference the photos in the product page. There are some really good shots of the dash showing the correct orientations of all those gauges. So again, I'm inserting that into there. And a little more kicker just to set it. For this one in particular, after I did that, I also added a little bit of glue to the top of the notch, just because this particular one is hanging on that feature. So a little extra CA didn't hurt anybody. It's going to help with the prevent anything from rattling out on you and losing the piece. If you guys do end up losing any parts of the cockpit, we can replace them. Just go ahead and email us. We'll get you over some new parts. This is going to be that gauge we talked about earlier that we cut off from the stock dash. This is going to be the full scale one that sits on the frame itself instead of part of the dash. This is the correct position for it. And again, it's going to glue in similar to the one you just finished. There's another little notch on it, and it's going to insert into the square hole to help you keep it straight. Again, this being one that is only secured by the little tang, went ahead and reinforced it with a little bit more CA once it was inserted on the edges, just to stiffen that up a little bit and give it some extra strength, because this is a gas airplane and there will be quite a bit of vibrations going on. All right, for this next part, we're going to start inserting the rudder pedal assembly and the main controls for the airplane. We're going to deviate from the video a little bit here. After this video was taken, we found that the rudder pedals do not actually fit into the airframe. They interfere with a portion of the main fuse. So you're going to ignore the rudder assembly at this point, where we took it out of the kit, because if you insert them and glue it all together, you will not be able to actually put your cockpit back into the plane. So we've excluded the rudder pedals themselves from the cockpit kit for this reason. Those rudder pedals, again, they do hit the an upper brace in the fuselage itself, so you can ignore this step, but I've left it in there because the stem is still included and you're going to want to follow the next step, which is gluing that stem into the cockpit itself. So that stem is going to sit between the pilot's legs, and we're going to go ahead and fit that main controller down in to the notch provided on that small back square there. So you see I'm just pressing that into the small square base that's down inside the cockpit from the stem piece. Making sure there's a nice fit between the two of them before I go ahead and glue anything in. All right, you can see it down there now. I've got it inserted in the correct position. And I'm going to set the distance forward to back, what looks right inside of my plane. Again, this front portion you can ignore because we are excluding the rudder pedals. So please, again, the same is true about the boots. Do not reinsert the boots onto the pilot. They will have the same interference problem with that upper brace that we spoke about in the fuselage. So go ahead and leave the pilot's boots off and skip this step, this process. Just leave the feet flat like we had put them when we inserted the pilot, and it will clear inside the fuselage. Another portion that's a little different on the kits than in this video is the stem and the square base for the main control stick are separate pieces now. So if you'd like, you don't even have to glue the stem in like you see me doing here, though you will see it as you look down inside the cockpit. As it would go forward underneath everything towards his rudder controls. So it's completely optional. We did separate the base that the main control stick glues to make the process a little bit easier if you just want to go ahead and glue that in and skip any portion of the rudder pedal assembly. All right, moving on, guys. We're going to go ahead and glue in those grippers for his heels that would be on the floor of the cockpit kit, and we're going to glue in this little gray plate. This is going to simulate the ammo box that you would see on a real one if you look down into the cockpit kit. It's just a small plate that glues to the front wood portion there. It's just a small feature we added. You know, it fills up the gap a little bit. It will end up compressing his legs slightly. Don't worry about that. They are cotton with just a small metal frame through them, so you can go ahead and compress those once your pilot's installed and place those grip pads in wherever you see fit. They are a visual option, and there's no feature that aligns them to the floor in any way. We're going to move on now to the gun set. We've got them pre-assembled from earlier in the video, and we're going to go ahead and start getting the final alignment for those on. You'll see here I'm inserting them into the two U brackets that are been installed in the plane at this point. I've done the pre-fitment. We've Loctited in those back screws, and we've tightened down all of the U brackets. So there's going to be a hole in the front and the hole in the back that pass through the gun. This is the portion where if you didn't do the alignment ahead of time, you might have some fitment issues. So go ahead and pass your mounting bolts through those two holes and make sure they line up correctly. If they don't line up, you're going to want to back out the back screw and use some washers to shift it forward or backwards accordingly. So you see here, I'm just getting my alignment back and just getting that screw down in there. I did find it was a lot easier to pull out my micro wrenches for the nuts, the nylock nuts that hold in that front mount. In paired with the Allen wrench, I found that was the best way to reattach these front U-bolts. You don't really have enough room to get in there with the set of pliers, though I suppose you could if you had a curved set, but this was the method I used. You can see in there, I'm just pulling the nut back out. They do fall in easily. But again, this is another step. It's a little tedious to get them started just because it's pretty tight fit down around the gun. But if you have one of those micro wrench set or something similar, you can use that to make it a little bit easier on yourself and hopefully not drop it as many times as you see me dropping it in the beginning here. All right, so I've got that screw started. Actually ended up using the Allen wrench to help me assist getting the screw through the gun, using the threads to pull it through. Right, moving on to the back mount. Um, it does help to leave the front one loose before you attach the back one, so don't snug it up all the way. Leave a little bit of slack on it so you have a little bit of play in the gun, so you can shift it back and forth that last little bit just to get that alignment right. Again, just using the threads of the screw to help guide it through. And doing my best not to drop the small nut as I get the thread started. All right, now that we're started, we're just going to cinch it up with the micro wrench and the Allen wrench. we're just going to do a final snug check on those back bolts before we tighten up the front one from here. And you'll notice on this one, we have the gun that we didn't glue the exit chute on the left hand side. This is the going to make this a lot easier when you're doing this step, as once that chute is in that slot that we cut out before, it's going to really kind of inhibit you from getting a good tight cinch down on those front bolts. But now that we're tight, we're going to go ahead and glue that exit chute into the plane, well, onto the gun itself. It's going to insert just like the other one. We're going to do a dry fit first, check first. Make sure it's on there, make sure our alignment down to our notch is correct, and we don't have to do any more cutting. Again, that cut is just following the front bulkhead there down past the line using an X-Acto saw and notching over slightly. I did several vertical cuts in it and just broke the wood out. That way I didn't have to do a cut front to back from there. But now that we've established the exit chute is in the correct position, we're going to do a final glue in. This is again after you fully tighten that left gun in the front, back, and forward bolts. We're going to repeat the process with the other side. And the process is the same. I'm going to jump forward a little bit here so you don't have to watch me redo all the same steps as the other side. I've gone in with a T-wrench on this side to make it a little easier to reach that screw instead of the standard Allen wrench. Just help me out a little bit there. But the process is the same. Alright, skipping forward. Alright, we've gotten that second gun tightened, glued on, everything's set. Doing the quick check on that to make sure everything's nice and tight. I actually ended up needing to tighten up that front mount one more time. After I got it started, you can get that wrench in there and tighten it with a standard Allen wrench. Just being mindful of where the chute is, working around it. I actually ended up using the wrench to tighten instead of the Allen wrench. The compressor wrench was a little easier to maneuver on this side. Now that I'm satisfied with how tight they are, I'm going to go ahead and insert the ammo box and magazines. So there is a left and the right. The larger one is going to be your left-hand one, and the shorter one is going to be your right-hand one. Keep in mind, remember, we did have to extend the notch on the right-hand side gun for this to fit properly. So if you haven't done that, you're going to have to go ahead and do that now, just extending it forward. Though this should have been completed earlier in the process. But as you can see, they slot right into the guns themselves, and they simply get glued to the guns. There is a small gap on the bottom in case there's some variation in your cockpit pod, but you can just go ahead and glue those straight to the guns, and you are all set.